Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. Today is September 8th. I'm recording this at 7 o'clock, and I should have it posted to Canvas around 8 o'clock tonight. I hope that you guys are having a wonderful start to your fall. Before we get into the lecture today, I wanted to really quickly go over your next, like the big assignment that's coming up. And so it's not oh, this is going to be the video. Sorry. It's not any upcoming discussion posts or quizzes. It's going to be your first research paper. That's due on September 28th. So you have 20 days. So I essentially just want to go over that quickly just to let you know again what that expectation is. You will see that here on week 7, 9/28. Bruce Perry research paper due. So let's go quickly through that just so you have a good understanding. So that's going to be technically your fourth assignment as you've been completing the additional assignments. So for this assignment, you'll select 2 of the Bruce Perry chapters and complete an in-depth analysis. So this should be about a 4-page paper that describes the child, the situation, the mental health effects, and then the intervention described. Essentially, like 2 pages of it should really be a mock-up of the child. So think of this as a client. So you're describing the child, what caused the issue, what happened, what were the effects, and then what did Dr. Perry do that was successful or did not end up being successful. And then additionally, using 2 to 3 peer-reviewed journals to just talk about additional research with the reactions and diagnoses. So this is an in-depth discussion and analysis. Essentially what I would do if I were you is I would pick the 2 chapters that you found the most interesting. And then from there, you should be able to write a reflection on that. So essentially, I would say 2 pages at least of the mock-up of the child, and then maybe a page and a half of additional research and analysis. And if you want to throw a little paragraph in the end with a conclusion as to how you feel like the case was wrapped up, I would find that appropriate as well. I also want to remind you so that the weekly discussion responses, the boy who was raised as a dog, each chapter, there's a few of you who are submitting very, very little work for that. Like I'm talking like a 1-sentence submission. And you're just not going to be happy with your grade if that's the work that you're turning in. Essentially, like this is really a huge bulk of your grade because this is showing me that you're participating in course content each week. And so if you're only submitting 1 or 2 sentences, you're just not going to be receiving grades that you're happy with. So please make sure that you're answering the questions, that you are citing material either from the textbook, or additional resources and links that have been provided, or the lectures. And then the other thing is, I would prefer you don't have the actual questions within your submission. I also was a college student, and I understand like when it's Friday night, you're trying to get something submitted, it looks a little longer if you have the questions in. But honestly, it's just more for me to read over, and so I'd appreciate if it's just your answer. If you give a really great answer and it doesn't take up a lot of space, like obviously that doesn't matter. I'm looking for quality. And so produce quality responses and you'll be really happy with your grade. With that, I'm going to go ahead and switch over and share our PowerPoint. And we will go ahead and get started with lecture over chapter 4. This says chapter 3 because, again, I'm just previewing for you the Bruce Perry chapter questions. I've already had a few people who have already answered this, so kudos to you. Always just starting with like, how did you feel about this chapter? This is a really unique chapter because it's kind of like an American culture like phenomenon. Like a lot of people know about this. There's been TV shows, there's been movies, there have been books that have been numerous books that have been written on this topic. And so again, like this would probably be a really great one to do your research paper on. And again, as I'm thinking now in my brain, because for the research paper, you're selecting 2 chapters. So I guess as I was saying, like you could do like a page and a half on the child and a page and a half on the child, and then that's your 3 pages. And then your additional page would be additional analysis using the cited journals. Sorry, that just clicked in my brain. Okay. It was a long Monday with my fourth graders today, and so let me get my brain in order so that this can be clear and concise for you. As I was saying, I would recommend doing this chapter for your research paper just because you're going to get a lot of additional sources and a lot of people talking about the kids. So, talking about routine and predictability, talking about after traumatic event, why do people need routine? How can we ensure that children have stability? How can we build these relationships with children? And if you're stressed, what do you do to handle the stress so you don't pass it on to the children? That's a super common thing no matter where you work. Even if you're just an adult and you have a child, becoming really frustrated from a working situation, it becomes really difficult not to come home and then have that frustration rub off on your kids, which they obviously didn't do anything to receive that. So, and then against, finally, that last one, thinking about the children who had the best outcomes weren't the kids that got the most therapy, that were the least stressed or were removed from relatives, but the ones who continued to follow Koresh's religion. They were the ones who had the strongest, healthiest support systems. So thinking about it's not the religion, it's not the therapy, it's not the relatives, it's the support systems. And obviously your support systems can live within those bubbles. But just how does this kind of relate back to how we should be working with children? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Our topic for this week is the impact of violence and addiction on children. So we're going to start with community violence. The United States has the highest incidence of exposure to violence. So a huge amount of children in America are consistently exposed to violence. 55% of US boys and 48% of US girls have witnessed someone being beaten up or being mugged. 7 children are killed every day in the United States by a firearm. Children in the US are 17 times more likely to be killed by a gun than children in 25 other high-income countries combined. I'm going to say that one again. Children in the US are 17 times more likely to be killed by a gun than children in 25 other high-income countries combined. Finally, exposure to violence can produce physical symptoms and create mental health issues. So, let's break down some of this information. We'll start with the fact that a significant amount of people in America have witnessed violence. Many children die by firearms in mass casualty events or single casualty events. And a huge part of this truly is when there's been some type of trauma in the child's life, whether identified or not identified, but then we're missing that support system. You're missing the after effect where we're intervening and assuring that the child has support. And so when you look at things like children that are more likely to be killed by a gun in America than in 25 other high-income countries combined, we start to look at what policies do we have in place in America that are continuing to build the statistic versus those other high-income countries. That could be what is seen by many people as lax gun laws. It also could be our lack of focus on mental health. Traditionally, people who do kill children with guns tend to be white males. And those white males that are doing that in America often have difficult mental health pasts and current histories. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing as people in social work avenues, whether that's in the medical field, whether that's in education. I know a few of you said that you're equestrian majors and you want to work with children in that variety. And so what are we doing as people that are going to come in contact with children that will likely have these same mental health issues to then prevent further violence or prevent them from becoming someone who would become violent? So another big thing of this, as we're going to get into, is desensitization. So a huge reason why we have so much violence occurring, specifically youth on youth violence, is just the desensitization that has happened. Children are constantly shown highly violent video games, movies, clips. Even if you're on YouTube and you're like on kids only YouTube, it is really interesting, the rabbit holes kids can go down with just a few clicks. And if you're not paying attention, and then you look, and many people have been shocked with what that child version of YouTube has led to. A typical child between 8 and 18 watches 7.5 hours of TV a day, which is insane because they're in school for 8 hours a day. In addition to other forms of media, around 10 to 11 hours a day of media, TV, television. That is a lot of opportunity for violence to seep in. Seeing violence. So as a kid, if you see violence, it increases your indifference. So the more that you see, the less that you're stunned. Again, like this is anything. Like if you see something that's kind of shocking to you, if you saw that every single day for 5 years, it's no longer shocking to you. And so things that we as adults, we would see and we would be shocked to see, we know are violent, inappropriate, like horrendous things. Of course, as a kid, the first few times, yeah, it's shocking to you, maybe even very confusing. You don't know what's happening, but the more that you see it, the more that you don't really care. Again, like a great example is like video games where you're shooting and killing others. Like maybe the first time you're kind of hesitant because you don't really know what that means. But there are many kids that consistently play really violent video games, and it means nothing to them. They're completely desensitized. Additionally, it also is going to decrease the ability to empathize with their victims. So because they're so desensitized to the actual action and experience of it, they're lacking that empathetic connection where they're understanding how that victim feels. And so they're seeing it, doesn't matter too much to them, and they're unable to connect with how that victim or how the person experiencing the violence, how that would feel. Obviously, like these are two huge reasons why we see so much violence in America, whether that's youth on youth, whether that's school shootings. There's so many reasons. And honestly, like the amount of TV and media that's just uncensored is as hard as adults try to continue to censor their children's media consumption, it's really difficult to do so. The last thing I wanted just to mention was juvenile violent offenders typically lack respect. And then again, they're unable to understand or empathize with another person and can be really impatient. This reminds me of a specific student I had. This person had a very difficult home life. At one point, they told me that they lived in a shed and their family lived in the house and he wasn't allowed in the house. Obviously, when I was hearing these things, I'm a mandated reporter, and so I made sure that that task was finished. But this student was extremely violent, like frequently getting into fights, would say the most insane statements that to me were shocking. Like how is a child saying this? But again, like they heard it so much. They heard it in the video games, the TV, the types of media that they were consuming, and so it meant nothing to them. And then when they would say and hurt, whether that's physically or just verbally, other people, they would have zero empathy because they truly could not understand at all how the other person would feel in that situation. So definitely something to watch for. And honestly, like even just thinking about how much violence they are exposed to, like automatically assuming if a child is playing these video games, if they are consistently watching like whatever TV show they want to, there's a good chance that their brain is already desensitized and that they're going to struggle with empathy as they grow older. Let's take a look at gang culture because this has a big influence on violence in America as well. So what I would do if I were you, you might just want to jot down these notes. There are going to be at least two questions, probably just two questions on this slide in your lecture quiz. So if you're a person that kind of wants to get ahead on that, there's going to be two questions based off this. So hedonistic and social gangs, these are gangs that use drugs but have very little violence. So it's very social. Let's hang out. Let's use whatever drugs are available to us. We'll have a good time. Maybe if someone's encroaching upon that right to do that drug or to meet socially, they could then become violent. But it's mainly more of like a social club. Then you have party gangs. So the difference here between a social gang and a party gang is a social gang is just using the drugs, while a party gang typically also sells them. And then a typical crime that they could commit is vandalism. They wouldn't see this as a big deal. Instrumental gangs, these gangs use drugs and do more property crimes. So that could be damaging property, that could be stealing, anything related with taking, breaking, entering. You'll see that the first four have a lot of drug use. Predatory gangs, this is the one that's like, like they also sell drugs. They do really serious crimes. A lot of these could be ones that maybe you see in the media. Scavenger gangs, this is super loosely organized. There's no clear goals. Maybe they come and go. There's not a lot of longevity within these gangs. There's no clear leader. It's just kind of groups of people together that identify under the gang umbrella. So then we have serious delinquent gangs. So this one is like really high crime involvement, but not much drug use. And so like now we're kind of getting onto the other side of the spectrum where like at the beginning, the drug use was high and the crime was low. And then when we have like our scavenger gangs, we're kind of like middle, like could be a little drugs, could be a little crime, but it's kind of like straight there balanced. And now when we're in serious delinquent gangs, like we're starting to get a lot higher on the criminal involvement and a lot lower on the drug use. Same here with territorial gangs, like control areas, turf wars. Again, this is one that you see depicted in media a lot. And again, here's our scale. And then organizational or corporate gangs. So these are very organized, disciplined, heavy crime. Like a good example of this would be like the mafia. A lot of this, because it's so organized, the gang is really self-sufficient, and most of these people have full-time jobs. Most of these people have really specific orders. They know exactly what's expected of them from their position. And it obviously super different than those gangs where their priority is drugs and social events. If you're an organizational or corporate gang and you have really specific rules, that's going to look a lot different. And then finally, the drug gangs. So this one is almost like completely by itself, just because the other ones have multi-purpose. This one really is just selling and using drugs. So this is a little bit smaller. This one is kind of unique because it could be seen as a gang. It could not be seen as a gang. If there's one person who is the creator of the drug and then they're passing it on, anyone who then is a salesman of it could be considered a part of a drug gang. But again, this term isn't used super frequently. So again, I might just ask you to pick two of these and differentiate. So there's your little heads up on that one. So why gangs? So it seems so interesting in 2025, especially if you come from a small city. I know growing up in Findlay, I was like gangs were something that people like joked about, but obviously weren't really prevalent where I grew up. And then I moved to Chicago and I heard a lot more about it and a lot more about certain areas and colors you weren't supposed to wear and things like that. And then now living outside of Detroit, I'm hearing it a lot more again in people's verbiage. So it's really interesting. I think a lot of people talk about it, but I don't think a lot of people really think about why people would join a gang. So a gang is essentially like a group of people who are finding belonging and protection with each other, whether that's a social gang where it's just a group of people that understand them and they get to hang out, or all the way to that other side of the spectrum, that organized corporate crime gang. Again, like there's a lot of protection in that. There's a lot of belonging. And typically teens, when they are choosing to join a gang, they're missing that connection elsewhere. Society has a lot of families that are breaking down, relationships that struggle within family units. But a gang can give you this. A gang can give you a family. They can protect you. You have that sense of belonging. You feel like you fit in somewhere. Status, importance. If you're doing the things that the gang asks you, you're moving up on the totem pole. Like there's a lot that could be really appealing to a struggling child or teen that doesn't receive any of these resources. And then again, like, if they kind of stumble into it and they become good friends or they build a relationship with the people that are part of this gang, it's going to be really difficult for them to pass that down, just because they're seeking that relationship and they want to belong. I mean, everyone wants to belong. Okay, let's take a look back at school violence in shooting. Now, I know this can be a really difficult topic, we're going to start with bullying, and then we're going to kind of talk about like how potentially like people who were bullies have been victims of bullying, and then how that can escalate as they get older. So bullying characteristics, again, like being an elementary teacher, I hear the word bullying thrown around all the time. And it really is our goal as educators is to teach kids that there has to be three things that would say that it's actually bullying. So the intent to harm. And so like they said that thing to you, they hurt you, that they specifically did something because they were trying to hurt you. It's repetitive. So it's happening over and over again. So this is like that you're getting on the bus and every day the guy trips you, or every day someone pushes the locker when you're trying to get in. Like every day, that's bullying. And then there's a difference, or oftentimes in a bullying situation, there's some type of difference, whether physical or social, in the power balance between the victim and the bully. So sometimes the bully is physically larger. Again, that's what we see in a lot of media. But many times they can be of the same stature, but it's social power. Specifically among women and girls, social power tends to be the bullying characteristics that we see the indifference of that. And so these are things like if they're trying to hurt you, it's happening more and more, or it's happening over and over again, and then there's some type of imbalance between the victim and the bully, then you can classify the incident as bullying. So there are 9 ways that students can be bullied: verbal, social isolation. So far, those two are very like self-explanatory, like someone saying something rude to you, isolating you, like no one's allowed to go and talk to you, no one can sit by you. Physical is like physically harming someone. Creating false rumors. This is a huge thing, and to me, like it connects a lot with cyberbullying in 2025. Obviously, like a false rumor could be spread verbally, but we know like most middle schoolers and high schoolers, if they're going to be creating a rumor, it's going to be on social media. Damaged possessions, threatening, racial slurs, unwanted sexual comments and pressure, and then cyberbullying. Really interesting documentary. It just came on Netflix this past week. And I think it was something about catfishing. I watched it this weekend, and it was like this perfect characteristic of this slide. Like the intent was to harm the girl. It was repetitive. Sometimes she'd get 50 messages a day. And then you'll find out like there's some weird social power imbalance between the girl and the person who's sending these text messages. And in these text messages, like there are obviously false rumors. It's verbal. It's isolating. The person who's texting is threatening to commit physical violence, like sexual comments, pressure, cyberbullying. Like it is insane. I would highly recommend, especially if you're a person that just enjoys like human interest stuff, I would highly recommend that. But bullies tend to have a strong need for power. Again, like a lot of times the people that really feel like they need the power have had all the power taken away in different situations. I really challenge you, like when you meet difficult people, to take a step back before you react and think about what would have already happened to them, or what could have happened to them as a child or as a young adult that would cause them to act this way. When you can change your mind into like, why are they acting this way? And then you can come up with some pretty plausible reasons and explanations. It's really going to change the way that you react. And it's going to make you a more empathetic person in general. Some bullies were former victims themselves. And then secondary victims are people who have witnessed bullying, but then also feel too fearful and powerless to act. We hear a lot about like bystanders and how like you need to report it. But again, there's a lot of societal pressure, and this can look like in a workplace, like a boss saying something kind of rude or maybe an unwanted sexual comment to another employee. And you don't want to report it because you don't also want to get potentially in trouble with your boss. Like, obviously, we know that that's not the correct way to think about that, but that happens to a lot of people, like wanting to save yourself in the situation and just not be involved. A lot of times people see negative instances, even in adults, of bullying, and instead they just choose to be really passive. And like, I hear all the time, like, oh, I just do my own thing. Like, I don't get involved in the drama. When it is different if you're actively watching bullying or something like that happen. Like that would be a secondary victim if you'd feel too fearful or powerless to act, versus just choosing not to act, even though you aren't fearful or powerless about it. So there's a balance there. So Obviously, like if you're a victim of bullying, there's going to be some repercussions that could be depression, low self-esteem, anxiety, psychosomatic symptoms, poor school performance, and suicide. Again, like if you think school is the place you're going to go to get bullied every day, whether, again, like look at those 9 different ways that would classify that as. Like if you're going to school and you already maybe aren't awesome academically, and these things are happening to you, you are not going to want to go to school. You're going to develop some really significant mental health issues. And you're going to start thinking about, how am I going to get out of this situation? And if you don't have a good support system, things like suicide and self-harm, unfortunately, tend to be a reality for a lot of kids that are bullied. Let's shift gears here and look at substance abuse. Just because, again, this slideshow, like out of all the slideshows, this one covers so much information. Not necessarily a lot of slides, but just the topics are kind of all over the place. So looking at substance abuse specifically for parents, 8.3 million children have at least one parent who is dependent on drugs or alcohol. I think a lot of times when we see a statistic like this, like our mind jumps like the most severe or crazy drugs that we can think about. But if your parent is coming home every day and having 2 to 3 drinks, whether that's socially or by themselves, like they are dependent on alcohol. If your parent had a back surgery a few years ago and they're still taking their prescription medicine, like there's a good chance they're dependent on a prescription drug. And so while, again, like especially if you grew up in an area that didn't have a lot of crime, was considered like a nice like blue collar city, like you're not going to jump to alcohol and the soccer mom drinking at the game. Like that's not where your mind's going to go to. But obviously, like 8.3 million children, there are a lot of people who fit into those categories. Your child can have a biological risk of alcoholism if the parent is an alcoholic. Again, that addictive personality, a lot of people say, oh, I can't do that. Like my family, addictive personality really runs in my family. Like that really is an actual thing. Fetal alcohol syndrome, I will tell you as a teacher and as someone who's been around students, fetal alcohol syndrome is a dead giveaway. It is so clear when you have a child that fits these characteristics. I wrote on page 98 and 99 of the Croston Tower text, it gives some more individual characteristics. Typically, you see a different shaped head, whether it's slightly like the features are a little bit more I don't want to say pointy, maybe a little bit more jaunt, a little bit more push forward. Usually there's speech delays. Usually there's significant academic delays. And same here with like the idea of like crack babies. Like I put a whole additional like article video in the module, just because it's like, this is the stuff that weighs on my heart so heavy, like whether it's a baby or a child, like none of these children or babies deserve such a negative way to start their life. They're already starting their life so far behind a baby that was not exposed to alcohol or drugs in the womb. And obviously they didn't do anything to deserve that. And so if those are things that interest you, I have some additional links and information within this module. Also, AIDS can be passed down to children when a mother has AIDS. And so America has tried to better these situations. I think obviously, like as we continue progressing as a country, we learn more about what pregnant women can do to protect their child. And things like needle exchange programs where they are asking people to bring in their dirty and used needles and get clean needles. So they're acknowledging like, okay, you have a drug problem. That's fine. Maybe here's some resources to help the drug problem. But more importantly, let's make sure you have a clean needle so that you're not going to get any additional diseases, whether you're with child or you're not with child. Parents using any type of substance and abusing that is going to be really, really difficult for a child to grow up and feel cared for and feel like they have that safety and security that they need to be successful emotionally, academically, all the things. Children who then use substances. So causes of children that could become chemically dependent. So if you're socially isolated, you have a poor self-concept or poor self-image, developmental issues, societal influence, rebellion against elders, asserting independence. So like as I'm reading this, your brain should be like, oh my gosh, I've heard her say all these things in the last 20 minutes. So yes, like children who are bullied who then have social isolation, well, they are at a much higher risk of then becoming chemically independent, or I'm sorry, chemically dependent. Again, if someone's bullying you, verbally assaulting you every day, you're not going to have great self-image. Developmental issues. If you were born as a fetal alcohol baby or a crack baby, or if you were born with AIDS, like you're going to have developmental issues. So all of these things, like it very much snowball effects here with hurt people, hurt kids. And so when we are creating these difficult home environments from the get-go, it's going to be really hard for us to fix that. And so again, like if a kid is coming from a difficult home situation where their parents abuse substances or getting bullied at school, well, it's going to be really hard for us to break that cycle because now that hurt kid has social isolation, they have developmental issues, they're trying to rebel against their parents because why did you bring me up like this? Why is this our life? And now they're also chemically dependent. Problems that now can occur, again, the snowball is growing when children are using substances. So again, that's additional attendance in school discipline, withdrawal from the family, fighting, stealing, decreased participation, anxiety, injury, and suicidal thoughts. The snowball does not end well. Often it ends with jail time. Often it ends with suicide. Often it ends with significant mental health issues. These are the ones that we need to really work hard to catch and be that one person in their lives that kind of changes things and slows them down and helps them find their worth or get out of a difficult bullying situation or an unsafe home environment. As a child, if you find yourself chemically dependent, you could go to drug-free treatment like counseling. So seeing a therapist and talking about maybe why are the reasons you're doing this and then how can we eliminate this. Detoxification. So this would be like a rehab center, like getting sent to a place where you definitely cannot participate in whatever chemical you're dependent on. And usually a rehab center also has counseling. And then typically then maintenance. So maintenance is often after you've gone through the detox process. That's like your AA group. So talking with other people, usually there's a licensed counselor and then other people who are going through the same situation as you. So I know, oh my gosh, this PowerPoint is really a lot. This was our last slide, but I hope that you see violent actions, especially if kids are experiencing violence in the home, whether that's chemical dependence, whether that's bullying. It really, really snowballs. Again, hurt people, because the more that you experience hurt, the more maybe desensitized you are to it, the harder it is to grow empathy for others. And so the more likely it is that you're also going to hurt someone. I hope that today you took something from this lecture. I kind of just want to go back and look at that very first slide again, where like essentially after we've talked about all these tiny little details again, like the US is the highest country with this violence exposure. Over half of the boys and almost half of the girls in America have witnessed someone being beaten up, someone mugged, physical violence. 7 kids every day are killed in America by firearms. And again, like maybe that's not tied to a policy, but obviously that's tied to all the difficulties at home and difficult situations we're facing that we're going to have to confront. If we want to get rid of violence, point blank violence, not any gun or knife, nothing specific. Like if we want to get rid of violence in America, we are really going to have to focus on how we stop the snowball. Those treatment, that prevention, how can we form relationships with kids? No matter what you do for work, if you get to have the opportunity to have a relationship with a kid and be that mentor and be that positive impact, it can really, really be life-changing, especially for a student or a child that can completely desensitized to violence and they don't know any better. Now they can learn to grow that bond with you. So this lecture like really hit me hard tonight. I hope that you feel like you can take something from it. Again, the vast majority of you are doing a wonderful job on your quizzes, on your Bruce Perry article responses. I'm super excited. If you have questions about the research paper, I'm thinking next week I'll submit another document, I'll submit another video where I'm reading through the syllabus document and I'll go over it again. And hopefully next week I'll be a little less confusing. So I want to make sure you feel really confident on it. But I hope that you have a wonderful week. As always, if you need to get a hold of me, Canvas is a great way, as well as my email. And I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I know that content like this isn't easy. And so I'm glad that you are all participating. So I hope you have a great week. Let me know if you need anything.